Hey there, everybody. This is Peter Fenton here, and this is my last episode of Read, Right, and Wrong. Enjoy. Abram is a really cool kid. Hey there, everybody. What's going on? This is Read, Right, and Wrong, the in-house author chat show at City Limits Publishing, where we discuss everything we've read, what we're writing, and what's wrong with it all. I'm your host, Peter Fenton, and today we are talking all things science fiction and, by default, youth culture with Abram Smith, whose new book, The Quantum State, will release on June... Crap, I didn't write it down. June 19th? 17th?
17th.
Will release on June 17th. Abram, welcome.
Hi.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, my favorite first question to ask our guests, tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name is Abram Smith. I'm from Owasso, Oklahoma. I'm a teenage science fiction author. I'm 14 years old, in the 8th grade. And over the period of COVID, I wrote my first sci-fi novel.
Very nice. Very nice. And so, yeah, the story that's coming to mind when I hear that you wrote your first book at 14, are you familiar with Christopher Paolini and Aragon?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Aragon was a very popular fantasy novel when I was a teenager, and it was written by a 15-year-old. I think he published it when he was 19, but the whole marketing with it was like, oh, this kid wrote a book when he was 15 years old. So that was the story that immediately jumped to mind when I heard that we were signing a 14-year-old boy, a 14-year-old author, I should say. So where did this come from? Because like I sort of get this idea that when you are, and I mean, I lived this myself, when you're 14 years old and you have an idea in front of you, like walk me through that process of starting to write this story. I know we're going to talk about the book later, but talk a little bit about the circumstance behind it. So you wrote this in COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to preface it all, this was all, I would say, April of 2020 is just when all this started. So that's the only thing everyone talked about. That's what's parents, teachers, the news. It's everything that was on everything. So it was on my mind, and I didn't really realize I enjoyed creative writing until I started writing. So really, I was able to just take what I started with, which wasn't a ton of experience or really even knowledge about creative writing. We had worked with it in school, but I was able to strengthen my skills throughout COVID, and I ended up writing a book by the end.
Yeah, that's not a small deal.
Right. It really, my idea started with maybe 10,000 words, which is a little bit longer than a short story. And then it ended up with a 75,000 word novel, just because I ended up realizing I really enjoyed it, and just writing about something I enjoyed just was really fun for me.
There you go. So was this like a way of killing the time day in and day out, sitting in?
Well, because right. Well, yeah, for me, school was obviously the biggest thing going on. And then it just got right after spring break, everything just stopped. So I needed something really almost to fill my time. So I picked up creative writing and just went from there, and then eventually ended up where I am today.
Yeah. And we're all better off for it. So, well, great. So why don't we transition into our first segment? So recent reading. So Abram, for the listener at home, Abram is sitting next to a stack of books. Are these all books that you have read?
Right. Yeah. Every one of these books I've read, and most of them fall under the category of sci-fi or almost a little bit dystopian, which is also, it's the preface of my book as well. Obviously, Harry Potter you see here, and I mean, that's just an all-time favorite. I mean, you can't leave that one off the list.
Right.
So I can go through some of these books and just how they kind of relate. Some of them. So I'll just start with this, Compound and Fallout by S.A. Bodine. These are some dystopian type books following what was thought a nuclear war almost.
Okay.
So these are just different books that they may have indirectly influenced my writing. So I've got those, and I have the Hunger Games, which
Hunger
are also
Games, yes.
dystopian sci-fi. So obviously those are on the list. I have I don't actually have all the books in print, but the Rule of Three series, which
Rule of
is
Three. Okay, I'm not familiar. Tell me about it.
It's post like an EMP attack. The main character starts just as a normal high schooler, and then an EMP attacks, which wipes out all communication technology, all electronics, including cars, transportation. Everything is out. So the world basically breaks out in chaos and a will to survive.
Yeah.
So that's also dystopian, as well as the Legend series, which is I didn't realize how many dystopian type books I liked.
Yeah.
But I also really enjoy sci-fi type movies in any type of media for that. Maze Runner books, which is definitely sci-fi.
Yeah, and that was definitely like, I feel like that's what everyone moved to once the Hunger Games series was over.
Right.
That was like sort of,
so
I mean, they're not related, but it's kind of an offshoot of the idea.
Right. Yeah, they both definitely fall under the same category per se. And then Harry Potter books are
Harry Potter, of course.
Probably my all-time favorite series of books.
So interesting. I have not read the Maze Runner, but it was something that a lot of people were talking about. What is the top line of that series? I know that it's young adult, dystopian.
Right. I can actually read you just on the back of the book if you want. So when Thomas wakes up in the lift, the only thing he can remember is his name. He's surrounded by strangers, boys whose memories are also gone. Outside the towering stone walls that surround the glade is a limitless, ever-changing maze. It's the only way out, and no one's ever made it through alive. Then a girl arrives, the first girl ever, and the message she delivers is terrifying.
Oh, interesting. So it's a village of all boys, and a girl shows up.
Right, and it's an isolated. I don't want to give any spoilers away in case anybody hasn't read it, but it's just an isolated community. Now I can't tell you why it's isolated, but there's no communication. It's just them. They all have their memory wiped, so all they know is other boys and their environment right there, which includes a huge maze, which they're trying to figure out a way out of.
Yeah. It kind of, I mean, the fact that there's a maze at the center of the story, do you know if there's any connection to like the Greek myth with the Minotaur?
I'm not 100% sure. That may have been some of their inspiration to the story. It doesn't have really any myth to it, but that might have indirectly influenced their writing.
Because I think I remember reading somewhere, and I don't remember where, so maybe this is fake news, but I remember Suzanne Collins had said something about the Minotaur myth when she was talking about the Hunger Games, because they send 7 boys and 7 girls to their death in the maze. And there was some parallel there. I don't remember actually if Suzanne Collins said it herself or if, I don't remember, but I just remember somebody drew that parallel at some point when the Hunger Games was really popular. Which was when I was in high school.
All those books are just some of my favorites. And I feel like now that I look back, I didn't realize it at the time, but those books may have somehow influenced my writing. Just the preface. Now mine is a lot more scientific. A lot of those are a bit more fiction, but they're still for sure some of my favorites.
Yeah, no, I mean, full disclosure for the listener out there, I edited The Quantum State. So I am intimately familiar with the book that we will be discussing here in a minute. I definitely get the sense that Quantum State is it's a science fiction, but it is a science fiction.
It's more science, and then it is very fictional, but it's fictional. It's got a lot of science to it.
Yeah, definitely. There were a lot of things that, I mean, I'm just not familiar with. I've never taken a physics class in my life. So I just had to sort of take your word for it. And I mean, my sister's a chemist, so I ran a couple things by her, but things seem to check out.
I will say, through writing the book, I just happened to research a lot more into these type physics concepts, and the concepts in my book with a theoretical. I'm kind of jumping forward to the right section, but with the theoretical ideas and technology they have in their book, they could technically work. Which is one thing I wanted to make sure that it would be scientifically accurate. I put that in air quotes because obviously the technology isn't here yet.
Yet, yeah. But, well, if Alan Barnes has his way, we'll be in a better spot, I guess. So Harry Potter is one of your favorite books of all time. What has that series been for you in your life? So I mean, it has become your favorite, but can you pinpoint a reason why?
So I think I want to say it was back 3 or 4 years ago, fourth or fifth grade, I started reading it. Before that, I wasn't a Harry Potter fan. I hadn't watched any of the movies, read any of the books. And one summer, my mom recommended for me to just read the first book. And then I just fell in love with the books and just, I think this kind of, in fifth grade, I think I actually started a Harry Potter club during recess.
Did you?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I did. Just to talk about the books. I can barely even remember it, but I just remember that we had a club that we would discuss Harry Potter because there were me and a few other friends from school. All were big Harry Potter fans at the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's such a touchstone, and it's so immersive. And once the entire series was finished, you could look back and see, oh, this was really tightly written, like the plot.
Oh yeah, the entire thing goes together. It's almost like it could be one entire big, long 1 million word book.
Yeah.
But it's a brilliant series for sure.
Yeah.
Because I reread it again after that, and there's so many different parallels that you can take from the first book that somehow lead into the last book, or the second book into the sixth book or seventh book. It's just crazy.
And you didn't really get that sense the whole way through. It's like each book stood on its own really well.
Right.
And that's what I find fascinating about that. Because like when people think through, okay, I'm going to write a series, they can sometimes get lost in, this is the series, but a series is made up of individual books. So, and Harry Potter, I think, is the best example of one that never lost sight of each book being a standalone thing,
but still completely relating into the next book and the following book.
It's unreal. I haven't loved everything else that's come out with the Harry Potter verse.
Yeah,
I didn't love Cursed Child.
I have actually not read The Cursed Child yet.
Okay.
Which I definitely need to, but I've been incredibly busy.
You can skip that one. Not to discourage you should always read, but yeah, if you were going to skip a Harry Potter thing, Cursed Child would not be the worst one to skip.
And I know you're a playwright, so you would know all about that.
Yeah, it's a bit messy, but also J.K. Rowling did not write that one. She wrote the story, which might have played into it, but anyway, we can talk about my own opinions later. So have you read a book yet where you found that you really liked it and not a lot of people know about it yet?
I know The Rule of Three isn't too well known.
Well, yeah, I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a very good book. I will say it's a bit of a slower paced book, but it's totally worth it in the end, just for the entire story. Now, for me, there are a lot of books that I really enjoy, but what I was able to do with my own book is take all of those things that I did enjoy and put it into my own book with my own story. So I was able to combine all the things I liked into the story that would have been perfectly appealing for me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to write something, I don't want to write something that I wouldn't read myself, because the book I ended up writing is the exact thing I would pick off a shelf if I had the choice.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it's like if you don't enjoy the work that you're creating,
then who else is gonna like it, right?
Who else is gonna like it? I remember seeing someone tweeted recently, if you don't stan yourself, who will? And that's very true. So you should love your own work.
For sure.
Which is actually perfect transition into our next segment, writing away. So you have written a book. Correct. Tell me about it. Yep. Well, tell the listeners about it, because I know.
Right. So it's named The Quantum State. It's post-COVID, so in the United States in a Cold War with China due to suspicions about the origins of COVID. Mm-hmm. Now, seemingly completely unrelated to the war is a 16-year-old mastermind and prodigy, Alan Barnes, who is beginning his education through the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, he's secretly recruited through a secret government agency named the United States Quantum Defense Agency to help develop quantum weapons for the United States military. Now, these weapons are a lot more dangerous than the currently existing nuclear weapons that they have. But as he soon gets more ever intertwined within the agency, he realizes that people he thought he could trust aren't really as they seem.
Interesting. Yeah, it's as somebody who read and edited this book, I have to say the plot is very good. Like it's a story that you keep wanting to find out what happens next. So I fully endorse that this is a really gripping story.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, it's really good. You should all order it if you're listening to this podcast. I have ordered my copy, so I'm very excited for that to come in. So I do have to ask, because I feel like over these months I've gotten to know you a bit, but that's only been through your work. So How much of, and I mean, no, I don't think that you're actually a secret agent with a quantum defense agency, but how much of it was informed by your own experience?
So, like you just said, I mean, the fictional part of it, you can obviously tell you could almost call it government-related fiction. None of that is, obviously, I have no idea about any of that. I could obviously say that. You never know. Maybe it might not be fiction after all. But really just the, like I said earlier, the science part of it doesn't really relate to my own experience, but to my own ideas. So those ideas in the book that I describe in a ton of detail, some stuff I've read says either don't describe it much, so you're not having the reader ask why, or describe it a lot so they're completely understood. And I couldn't just describe a little bit. So I went full in on the scientific concepts. And those are really my own ideas that could theoretically work. Sure. But I can't say there's too much of my own experience, but my own ideas, scientific ideas that went into it.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And there are places in the text where we kind of break from the plot and go into a science lecture.
Yes.
Which I think is really unique and fun. And theoretically consistent with what is possible. So that's good. The main takeaway that I had as I was reading it, or at least in how I was connecting it to Abram Smith, the person, was it's told in first person through a teenage boy who is very smart. So I sort of was reading you into the character of Alan. How much of, like, where would you say Abram ends and Alan begins?
Really? Well, that's a tough question, but I would definitely say they're related. So I don't think I did it on purpose. Yeah. But just because I'm obviously me and I was writing it from first person in Alan Barnes' point of view, I can definitely, now looking back, I can tell that I took my ideas and possibly something like MIT, a school I might eventually want to go to, or just different experiences like within the government, things I've heard about, just different conspiracies. And I kind of took my own ideas or things that I might want to eventually happen and just kind of put them in, not necessarily as a main point, but there's definitely some underlining things that come directly from my mind that relate to me almost.
Yeah. And I think that's totally valid and totally just the natural thing when you're a writer. Your characters end up being sort of a reflection of you, especially when you write it in the first person.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it was interesting because I feel like as I was getting to know Alan, that's how I was getting to know you, which is an interesting first way to meet somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So who else has read your book so far? What have people been saying about it? Because of course I just offered some of my takes from Quantum State, but I'm sure other people have had far more interesting thoughts.
So my mom was actually the first person ever to read it. So she
Mhm.
read my original rough draft, which I just, for anyone on YouTube, I have it right here with all
Yes.
my rough draft and
Oh,
notes
but
and
you have the
everything.
final cover.
Right, and I have the final cover on here, and I actually have some other covers, and just I can't really open this up because there's a lot of good stuff in here that you
Yeah.
all will have to read when it comes out. But that original copy my mom read and provided some editing feedback. My dad has read the book, or he's in the process of reading the book now. My grandma has read the book. And my English teacher, my 7th grade English teacher, Miss Phyllis, read parts of the book. Or I don't know if I ended up sending her the final copy, but I'm definitely giving her a copy
sure.
as soon as it comes out.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's good to keep, at least in my experience, I've kept a list of all the people who helped me get the book to where it is. And then as soon as I got my author copies, I immediately sent them in the mail and was like, hi, thank you for getting my book to where it is.
Yeah.
Cool. So while we were going through the editing process, you had mentioned to me that you were already working on a sequel. How's that going?
It's going very well. I will definitely say from the beginning of the Quantum State to the end, my writing drastically improved. And I don't just mean a little bit. I bet as my editor, you could probably tell that the entire book just changed from the beginning to the end.
Oh,
or
yeah.
at least I can say that. And then now what I've written so far, I can just tell that it's definitely almost higher quality than my first book. I don't know if I can really say higher quality, but I have enjoyed rereading through parts of it just to see. And I really like the way I've put it together now that I have some experience per se of writing a book, because now I'm able to take that experience and then apply it to a somewhat new story, but not a completely new story because it continues on.
Sure.
Now we can talk about this more. I think I have something to mention during the wrong segment. About an ending and how we'll get into that.
Well, I think I might know about that. Yeah. So, and I mean, you'll find that, right? So you had written your debut novel and you are now writing your second one after having written one novel. So when you wrote your first book, you had not written a book before. So no matter how good your first book turned out, your second book will be better.
Right. And I can even tell that from my own point of view, that I can just tell it's a higher quality of writing and just a higher quality storytelling almost. Also, one big thing is, for me, something that was a little bit difficult during writing is trying to get the story started. And because this one directly continues on with a big cliffhanger almost, it just jumps straight into the action. It was a lot easier to begin and keep the story going, which also helps with me writing and realizing just the quality almost of how I started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's just like, especially if it's a continuation of the story, I feel like you're in a unique position to really see the growth of book 1 to book 2 with people staying on in the series and with you being another year older, another book under your belt. Like, I think that they might see a quantum leap in your growth, if you will.
I like that phrase.
Why not? I can definitely say, as the editor, my comments, you can probably see my frequency of comments and more like, I think you have an opportunity here to ... Those were heavier at the beginning of the book and got lesser as the book went on. So I definitely did see improvement in your writing as the book went on, but hopefully now we got it to a point where it's just uniform throughout.
Right. Yeah, the beginning, I can definitely say from submitting it, I did before I even submitted it to City Limits Publishing, I put a lot of editing into that. And
Yeah.
I started and then I went through to chapter, I think 25 or so. Then I came back and wrote another 2 chapters at the beginning
Oh yeah.
just to try and, because I had reread the beginning and I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta fix this. So I came through, wrote another couple chapters, got this all edited up, and just tried to get a more entertaining beginning that,
Huh.
because I mean those first 3 chapters, we don't talk about those. I mean, those were really just me getting started with writing.
Right.
But without those, I probably wouldn't have kept going.
Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting, because this is the first time I'm hearing that it was somewhat written out of order. Do you, I mean, which 2 chapters were the ones that got slid in later?
So what happened is on my very first day of writing, I think I wrote 3,700 words.
Yes.
In
Yeah,
my
I
very
remember
first
seeing that
in
on
my
your
in my
website.
very first day of
Yeah.
writing. So that was probably probably 3 chapters or so. And then I went through, and during COVID I had plenty of time, so I just kept expanding to chapter 20, 25 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And what I had done, I don't remember my reasoning for sure for this, but it ended up working out well, is I went back and I began editing my own work just
Mm-hmm.
to see like if there were any plot holes or anything I needed to fill in before I moved on to the
Yeah.
big climax and ending. And at the beginning, I realized that there wasn't a lot of action almost going on. I needed to just somehow expand. So what I was able to do is add in, just kind of change the beginning of it and add in a little bit more action just to get it going. And then I was able to take that and lead it into the next part. So I kind of like just chopped off my first original part, wrote this part at the beginning, and then linked the two together.
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd, but I was able to come back and make it work. And a very good thing was my quality of writing had improved. So I was just, those first 2 chapters were better than my original starting place.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, whatever you did worked, because the book worked. As I was reading it, I didn't notice, oh, this was clearly just slid in later. So that is not a place where you went wrong. But let's go into our final segment, all the wrongs.
So now, as my editor, you would be pretty aware of this.
well, I have a list. No, so where is somewhere that you feel that like a lesson that you've taken from any part of the process that I may or may not have been part of?
So my biggest thing that comes to mind first is the ending of my book. So just for all the listeners out there who haven't read my book, unlike Peter, who really was the one who proposed this, I ended on a very, very large cliffhanger. And the book almost went, and then it went up, and then it came back down, and then it just skyrocketed back up. But it just didn't have really closure to it. So Peter's idea was for me to take and then cut it at a certain point to an epilogue.
Yeah.
And then I was able to add just a little bit of closure on there. And then I had a closing of the ending book. And then the epilogue's more like a teaser, like in a Marvel movie almost.
Yeah.
Just teases towards the next book. And that really is what determines the next book. The epilogue could almost be the first chapter of the next book.
And so when you're going to write this second book, did you include that epilogue?
So I didn't. That could be something I might eventually go back and add as a prologue or whatever we would call that.
Chapter 1.
Right. But it's so directly impacted that dialogue continues almost from the end of the epilogue in the first book to the first chapter of the second book, is how much they go together, and just like his thoughts continue on. Just so that's really something that I had to improve on, and just it allowed my book just more closure, but still allowing you to enjoy what was there and be excited for a next book, but not be frustrated that it just ended with no closure.
Right. Because how you end the book is almost as important as everything that comes before.
Right. I remember you saying that in that comment.
Yeah.
Which was
I did use those words exactly, didn't I?
Right. And that's one thing I really wanted to make sure that I did, is I wanted to make sure I had the ending to the story I told but still a little bit more just to pique your interest.
Oh yeah. And I think that, I mean, I actually have not read it after the second round of editing, but I'm sure that whatever you came up with works.
I just added a little bit more closure on there, and it just added a more complete book, I could almost say.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So what was the process like putting your book out on submission? So I watched a local news piece that you did for Owasso, Oklahoma. I actually just rewatched it before the interview to get it fresh in my head, which is how I remembered your teacher, Mrs. Hill. But so you said that you had actually submitted to like 7 or 8 different publishers.
Right.
So what was that process like for you?
So what I had done is I had my mom edited the book. I got all of those edits in, made a few more changes, and then I had my final submission. Now I went through, submitted to a couple. I think I had 2 that I originally submitted to, and each of those required some, I almost could say, cover letter questions. So just why you wrote the book, what inspired you to write the book, different questions like that. That I just had to answer. And what I was able to do is I submitted to them, and then I kept those answers on file. So while I was waiting for them to review, I was able to go and submit to 3, 4, 5 different publishers, City Limits being one of them. And just so I could give everybody plenty of time to review, and then have it out at 7 or different places, hoping someone came back and said yes.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter because I had 6 different places to say no, and all I needed was 1 to say yes.
Yep.
And I ended up getting, I want to say, 2 no's back. A few of them just hadn't responded or hadn't finished reviewing by the time I accepted the contract with. What
was that like when you received your no's from the other places? How did that feel? Like how did you cope with that?
So I would say the very first place I submitted to, I had a little bit of time between that and the next submissions. So they were the first ones to review it, and they just told me that they weren't interested in publishing. But by then I'd already submitted to 5 or 6 other publishers. So it wasn't like this huge blow because I knew there were so many other different chances. Yeah. I mean, this company, I had been on their newsletter waiting for them to reopen their fiction submissions. And I really thought it was going to work out, to be totally honest. Yeah. But in hindsight, I'm pretty glad it didn't.
Sure. Yeah. And you and I would never be having this conversation.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I just know that one of the hardest things as a writer is to get over the idea that every single place is going to love what you write.
Right.
And I mean, that's something that I even struggle with. As like when even I get no's still 12 years into my writing career, it still like is a little chip on my shoulder when that happens. So it seems like you have adopted this attitude of I just have to keep submitting and I have to keep doing until something happens. And I think that's the attitude to have.
Well, luckily at that time I was almost just bombing it out to all these different publishers. Now, still taking time to make sure I answered, because I didn't want to just go so quickly and not answer their question, so it was an automatic no. I just went through it. I was sending it out I was doing a lot of research, trying to figure out different places to submit it. I wake up on Saturday morning and be like, oh, let me go see if I can find another publisher to submit to. And just different things like that. And I was able to get it out to a lot of different places. Because I will say, to find a publisher that doesn't require an agent, and an author can submit directly to and still have their work published for free, and it's not a vanity press or a hybrid press, it's not something
tall order. It's a tall order.
It's not something super, super common. So those 7 or 8 different companies I found, actually I did find, answering your question, City Limits Publishing just through a Google search for this, but those were, I don't know if I ever found any other, because I started it became harder and harder to find. So I had 4 or 5 that I found pretty quickly at the beginning. And then I just kept searching, and I kept declining on how many I could find. So 2 or 1 that I submitted to. And then by the end I would search and I couldn't find any more that really submitted from authors that authors could submit to, and then have it to where you didn't have to pay.
Yeah.
Just the
let alone
style.
Yeah. Let alone fiction or publishing in your genre,
right?
All that.
And the difference between the big company and the smaller company, because I know all of your big five publishers, all of those have usually probably one branch that authors can submit directly to. So I think I went, I can't remember exactly, but I submitted to a couple of those. But I think it would be definitely a lot different working and editing and all that with that bigger company.
Yeah.
Because they're more focused on for sure the money aspects. Now, obviously everybody's focused on the money, but they're more concerned about just making their money than asking the author what they care and their thoughts or opinions or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the smaller independent publishers can give the author a lot more freedom.
Right. I would say there's a lot more communication. We've emailed back and forth. I almost say hundreds of times.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if I search
where I'd get their weekly newsletter.
Yeah. If I search Abram Smith on my Gmail, on my business Gmail, I probably have at least 100 emails.
I have a whole folder of City Limits Publishing on my email, and starting from the top, you can just keep scrolling and scrolling. And I've got so much correspondence, but I'd rather have a lot of correspondence than none.
Right. Yeah. It's I've found that these decisions aren't necessarily made on a money basis. Of course, they wouldn't have taken your book at City Limits if they didn't think they could sell it. But there was just a lot less politicking, let's say.
Right. Now, the big change at the end, if like it even says in, I believe, the actual contract that I have the final say on content. So if I wanted to, I could have just not changed the ending. I could have rejected every single one of those comments. No, obviously, I really didn't want to, because all the feedback was great feedback and it really improved my book. But that's just one really positive thing about going with a smaller publisher. And just you have a more feel like your opinion actually matters. Yeah.
And it's like, and of course there are things that you're trading off by going with the smaller publisher and having the more freedom. Our resources are not as much as like a big five publisher, and we don't automatically get on the shelves at the big bookstores and all that stuff. But I don't know. Like,
but I think it was worth it to have a say, because they could have gone in and they could have changed every little bit of my book and I could have done nothing about it.
Yep.
And that's not the goal of publishing wasn't necessarily just to have it as a full-time job, but more as a job to get my story and my work out there.
Yeah.
And if they were to make all these changes, it wouldn't be my work anymore.
Yeah, and you would sort of feel a little more distant from the final product.
Right.
Which is how I feel with some of the other work that I have out there.
Right. So who did you use as your publisher for your previous works?
So I used a publisher that they license plays for school productions.
Okay.
For school and like community theater production. So it's not like it was a traditional publisher in the sense that, all of like there were no fees associated with it and all that. But like my first two plays are not being sold in book form.
Right.
They're more sold as like, so you want to put on this play by Peter Fenton. And so they just sell it to those organizations, which is what I thought was the only way to get published as a playwright. And then of course, I met City Limits Publishing, and the rest is history. So
actually having your work, not just having different schools contacting you, you're really out there with your book.
Yeah, it's like it's not just this community of drama teachers who are seeing the synopsis of
it's everybody.
It's everybody.
Right.
And I can tell half truths and say that it's a book, and people might pick it up. It is a book.
Yeah. Of course.
But yeah, so that's that. What about things that you've read that you didn't like that much? So where do you think authors have gone wrong, either in the specific or in general? Like, what's something that you can't really get on board with?
So one of my biggest things that I focused on during my book, for sure, was a main topic on my mind, and I've seen other books that I like the story behind it, but the biggest thing for me is the pacing. The pacing is a huge deal to me. I don't know what it's like for everybody else, but that's one of the biggest things for the book. Like the Rule of Three, it's a great story. It was worth my time to read, but it was very slow. For my book, I wanted to make sure, which especially during the second book, just to make sure there's no spots of just and where there's nothing going on. I want to make sure there's always something going on. I think the new Hunger Games book, it's 150,000 words long.
There was another Hunger Games book, wasn't there?
Yes, it's a very good story, worth my time. But it wasn't the fastest book. There was a lot of slow parts to it that just make you just need to get to the next part. It's interesting, and now it was very well done. It was just very slow. And for me, I need a bit more fast pacing to just keep
your attention.
Right.
Yeah. And I will say you avoided all the pacing issues with Quantum State. It's definitely one where something happens in every chapter.
All right. I think one big thing I focused on was having a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, or just something to make you want to keep reading. Because whenever you just have like some type of closure, not even if the closure only lasts a few paragraphs, it can still get slow to read. You still have to have some suspense or whatever, or there's no story to read.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Abram, it has been wonderful talking with you today. Really a pleasure. I'm so excited that as of the release of this episode, your book is out. It is available. You can order it directly through citylimitspublishing.com. Abram, thank you so much. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh, I don't think so. Thank you very much for having me on here today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you online and on social media? I know I helped you set up some of that.
You can go to abramsmithauthor.com.
Okay.
To find my website, all the information about my book, about me, everything's on there. You can also follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Abram V. Smith.
Yes.
And it's the same for all of my different platforms. So you can follow me on all of those and get the latest updates.
Awesome. Cool. So thank you all for listening. I'm Peter Fenton, and this is Red, Right, and Wrong. Thank you so much for coming along for the ride with me on the Red, Right, and Wrong podcast. I have had a lot of fun with these interviews, and now it is my time to go. You can find me online at bypeterfenton.com, or you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at peterfent. Thanks, everybody. Go give 'em hell.